Absolutely. That's one of the great benefits of guidance because life is too much for us to handle on our own. We can't figure everything out.
Yeah.
We don't know what's coming down the pike. We don't know all the facts that are relevant to a decision. It's just too much for these little brains. And the part of the beauty of guidance is we can consult an all-knowing source.
I'd like to welcome a very special guest to the show today, Robert Perry. He's joining us from the Circle of Atonement. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you today about a lot of different things that are spinning around in spiritual communities, and I'd love to get your take on what A Course in Miracles says about these important topics. So,
Well, I look forward to it.
so the number one topic that I wanted to kind of bring to light is manifestation. So, when I scroll on TikTok, there is a lot of information about how we create our own reality. And there's a lot of teachings that say if you focus on the thing that you want, so there's a lot of focus on the material world. If you focus on the thing you want, it will be brought into physical form. So I understand manifestation or creating a reality a little bit differently, but I'd love to hear, what does A Course in Miracles say about manifestation and creating our reality?
Wow. Okay, that opens up a lot. First of all, the course is really clear about its path, about what it wants you to do. It provides practical exercises for everything it considers important. And there is literally not a single exercise about visualizing what you want. It's clearly not part of the course's system. Furthermore, the course, what it says is that the source of our suffering involves, at least in part, how attached we are to material things, to money, to our external circumstances going just right, to other people treating us just right. And so manifesting, as I understand it, it kind of assumes that if we get everything to go right on the outside, if we get the right people, the right jobs, the right possessions, the right amount of money in our lives, we will be happy. And the course is a fundamental challenge to that whole thought system. From its standpoint, that stuff never makes us happy. We tell ourselves that if we just get the right stuff, we'll finally be happy. But even when, on those rare occasions, it turns out the way we want, we're still like almost in the middle of it, looking forward to the next thing that's going to do it for us because that thing has not done it. So, from the course's standpoint, we need to go through a process of changing our minds in which we stop seeking from what it calls the idols of the world. There's a section and a repeating phrase in that section. The title of the section is the same as this sentence that repeats and repeats. And the sentence is, seek not outside yourself. And manifesting is all about that. So from the course's standpoint, we have to be withdrawing our attachment to those things because that attachment causes us to suffer. And it even says that we shouldn't be the one to decide what we need, like in terms of possessions, that we should leave it up to the Holy Spirit to decide what we need and even to supply what we need, which is interesting, while we focus on what really matters in life. So I personally think that something like The Secret, which was super popular, quite a number of years ago,
Yeah.
is practically the antithesis of the course because it's just a different version of go out there and get what you want. We're all trying to do that with our behavior, And manifesting just says, now you can use your mind to do the exact same thing. Is it really that different to go out and get it behaviorally versus to get it with just the sheer power of the mind? It's all the same program. And from the course's standpoint, it's never worked. And if we're going to really find happiness, we need to go on a new track.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that once we manifest the thing, it's like we're never actually fully satisfied. So
Right.
if we're following The Secret or these other models of thinking about the material things that we want to bring them into our reality, when we get there, it's like, what's next? What's next?
Right. Right.
And
And it's a superficial life. Our real desires will not be met by those shallow things.
mhm, yeah. And I know in my own journey, there's when I've tried to manifest or follow these things, if it didn't get there, if I didn't manifest it, there was, a sense of failure or
Mhm.
um, disappointment in myself. But I loved how you said that the course points us to to I forget which lesson it was, but it says, forget that what you think you need, or realize that we don't know what our best intentions are.
Yeah. And what our best interests are.
Hmm.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that it may not work at times. I mean, there are interesting studies that show that the manifestors do worse at achieving their goals. On average, they do worse. And the reason is that while they're visualizing, okay, this is how I will feel when I get this thing, they reduce their motivation to actually get it. And so,
Hmm.
oddly enough, people who are employing manifesting techniques usually do worse at achieving their goals. The people who just go out there and do the footwork and go after it in conventional ways do better. However, that's not to say that manifesting doesn't work at times. There's a very interesting story. I don't know if you know this from the writing of the course
Hmm.
about this a manifesting kind of story.
Okay.
So in 1965, Helen Schucman and Bill Thetford joined in trying to find and demonstrate another way, a better way in which people could get along. And that unleashed all kinds of spiritual experiences in her, including paranormal or psychic experiences. And so she entered in a few months, and in the months between that conversation and when A Course in Miracles began coming through her, she entered what she called her magic phase. And her magic phase was one in which she was finding she actually had psychic powers. And so part of the magic phase was where Bill Thetford was going on a vacation, I think in the Virgin Islands. And while he was there, she sent him a mental message to buy for her what she called a Florentine gold pin. So it was a gold pin with it was called a Florentine finish, whatever that is. And what happened was they realized later that at the moment she made that request of him, he was over there. The friend he was with said, "Hey, let's go into this jewelry store. We might find something for Helen." And then while in the store, the friend pressed Bill to get her Florentine gold pin. And so Bill, upon returning it, gave her this gift, but she had manifested it, which seems like success. Great, it worked. But what happened was she had to make a conscious choice to give up her magic phase in order to be the scribe of the course. And that was the story that she told where she had an inner vision of being in a cave where the Dead Sea, she later saw this as the scroll, the Dead Sea, that the cave the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in. Um, and in this cave, she found a scroll and she unrolled it. And there was on the center panel just the words God is. But as she unrolled it further, on the right panel and the left panel, she could see everything that happened in the past and all that would happen in the future. And she had to make a choice where she rolled the scroll almost all the way up to where it just said God is. And she said, I'll stick with that. And that was apparently the choice in which she fully accepted her role as what would become being the scribe of the course. And so for her, it was a choice between would she use those powers to do things like manifest gold pins, or would she use them in service of God to bring through higher wisdom? And it was an either or choice for her. And I think it's a kind of an either or choice for us.
Right. I love that story. I have heard it before on your podcast.
Okay. Okay.
And I love how you mentioned that her role. And it reminds me of this in chapter 20, what the course says, which is what I really wanted to ask you about today. So it says, once you accept his plan as the one function that you would fulfill, there will be nothing else that the Holy Spirit will not arrange for you without your effort. He will go before you, making straight your path and leaving in your way no stones to trip on and no obstacles to bar your way. Nothing you need will be denied you. So that just feels like the manual, right? It just feels like that's all we do, right? Accept his plan as the one function. So I'd love for you to dive in and explain, what does the course mean when it talks about our function or our role with his plan?
Yeah, really important topic. And let me just say before we dive into the topic, this is kind of the course's attitude towards our external lives, towards our material affairs. We're meant to just focus on doing our function, which I'll talk about in a sec. And then when we really fully devote ourselves to it, he just takes care of the rest. Okay. So he'll take care of all those external situations and circumstances, including our money and our possessions that we spend our time wrestling with right now. You know, we spend our time trying to control all of that and improve all of that and make it just right so we can have that moment where it's perfect and we're happy and we're at peace. And what the course is saying in that passage is that if we just devote ourselves to what really matters, what we're really here for, he'll just take care of the rest. And that reminds me of a place, again, I'll get to the function thing, but there's a lesson in the workbook, lesson 345, where it says, the miracles I give, meaning to others, are given back in just the form I need to help me with the problems I perceive. So I just go out there and give miracles to others, which is mainly defined in the course as expressions of love. So I go out and give expressions of love to others. And then those return to me in just the form I need to help me with the problems I perceive. So I can spend all my time saying, I got these problems, I got to solve them. I don't have time for you and your needs. And I can spend all my time trying to solve my problems. Or I can go out there, focus on what other people need, give them expressions of love. And then that just kind of returns to me. And as if by magic, although that's not a great word in the course, my problems are solved. And that's very much the spirit of the passage you just read. So I just focus on my function, and the normal stuff of life that we spend our days wrestling with gets solved for us. So I don't know if you want to say anything before I go on to the function part.
I do, because one of the concepts that has really been well, it's been relieving. When I read it, I feel relieved, but it has been a little difficult to wrap my head around, and it's opposite of what's out there in the mainstream. So you said, when we give our miracles, when we offer miracles, all of our needs will be taken care of. So there's, I think it's chapter 6 in the course, it says to have all, give all to all, which is really different from the normal way of thinking, or the typical paradigm that we're in, where it's when we're giving, we're actually giving away and we're losing. But the course says it in a very different way, that to give is to receive. So I just wanted to put that in there as well, because that
Yeah.
popped up really strong for me when you mentioned that lesson, which I haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah. Yeah. That's in what's called the lessons of the Holy Spirit. That's the very first lesson of the Holy Spirit.
Hmm.
And it's closely related to the whole issue of our function. From the Course's standpoint, our function, which we might call our life purpose, our calling, our true vocation, why we're here, is to be a giver. The Course talks about this in many forms. One form is to be a miracle worker. Another form is to be one of God's ministers. Course talks about being a healer, talks about being a teacher, but all of those are different ways of talking about the exact same thing. From the Course's standpoint, we are here on earth to give miracles to others, expressions of love, and in the process to fulfill our own special part in the salvation of the world. There are certain people we are meant to help, to heal, to teach in one form or another. And by devoting ourselves to that, we play our part in the much, much bigger picture of the salvation of the world. And so when the Course talks about our function, that's what it's talking about. And it even talks about our special function, which is very interesting. So we all have the same generic function. We are here to give miracles, to give expressions of love, and to thereby be a healing influence. And in the Course, this happens most commonly in ordinary expressions of love. The Course says that it can take more impressive, seemingly miraculous forms of healing the sick and even raising the dead. There is a whole kind of supernatural component to it. But if you look at the stories in Helen and Bill's lives that the author of the Course, who claims to be Jesus, called miracles, they were ordinary things, ordinary kindnesses. So we all have the exact same generic function, but the Course says we all have our own special function. And this is the special way in which we are best suited to do all that. So there's certain strengths we all have that others may not have in the same degree. And the Holy Spirit will take those strengths and design for us our special function, which is our very particular life purpose. And that includes the particular people we are meant to help. So we all have the same generic function, but we all have our own unique special function.
I love that you brought in the special function, because I completely understand the one function. And where I get, and I think this probably goes with, the old kind of thinking, or the mainstream, it's like, what's my function? What's my special function? How do I know it? How do I know it? So how how do we know what our special function is?
Really good question. That's been a big focus of mine over the years. I I had my own story of finding my special function, and it was really different than what I wanted. I mean, very briefly, I
Mhm.
really, when I was much younger, I wanted to be a philosopher, especially in philosophy of mind, um, sort of philosopher with a psychological bent. I wanted to design my own philosophical system and spend my life promoting it. And I just got, in essence, taken off that track, and pulled on to teaching A Course in Miracles. And it was so different than what I wanted that it took me literally 10 years to kind of knuckle under to, okay, like it or not, this is my function in this lifetime. And I think that's kind of how it works, where we may have our ideas, but the Holy Spirit has his idea, and it may even use the exact same strengths that we had wanted to use in our idea of our function. And so I do think we go through a process, ideally. I think most people never even go through the process, but I think ideally we go through a process in which we slowly realize, oh, that is the function that has been assigned to me.
Yeah.
I think the function is generally multifaceted, but it's still somewhat unified. And I think that we have to pay very, very close attention to guidance because, again, it's not our idea. And I think the guidance can come through a lot of different forms. And we can talk about, what those forms are. For me, a lot of it came through certain doors opening, um, came through guidance that other people received, came through really striking coincidences or synchronicities, came through inner guidance that I received. But it was a process that took years of slowly realizing, oh, wait, I was so passionate about this thing that I felt I should do. And I had to, bit by bit realize that the Holy Spirit had something else in mind. And I ultimately had to sort of get on that bus and get off the track that I wanted to be on. So I do think it's about paying attention to guidance, but I think that it's something that tends to be revealed to us slowly through all kinds of different forms of guidance. And I also think that the most important process or most important part of moving into our special function is not finding out what it is. I think the most important part is growing into the readiness for what it is, because doing it requires us to essentially become somewhat different people who are more mature, who have more to give, more love to give, more wisdom to give. And even if we know tomorrow what it is, chances are we won't be ready to do it. There's a whole preparation process, a developmental process. So I think we have to think in terms of those two tracks. There's the process of growing into what it is or growing into the readiness for it. Then there's the process of it slowly being revealed to us what it is. And those two things finally meet, I think, as we begin to move into what it is. But my experience is that most people can spend years thirsting after it. And when it finally shows up, they often run because there's a lot of resistance to it's almost like we're afraid of our lives being taken over and not being our lives anymore. And we're also telling ourselves that we're not worthy, we're not adequate. So it's a whole huge issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much juice in all of this. So first, I just want to comment on how you said that it can like, and I don't know if I'm gonna get the exact words, but kind of unravel slowly.
Mhm.
And I know for me and my journey and a lot of my clients that I talk to, it's like, you know, the patience to know it. We want to know now. What are we supposed to do? And if we
Mhm.
don't get
Mhm.
the answer right away, it's like we're lacking a little bit of evidence, or we want something to hold on to keep going in that direction.
Yeah.
And just in my own journey, I don't know if the podcast is my function, but 10 years ago, I was, you know, really trying to break through as a coach, as a teacher, and I didn't. I just went into corporate America and did all these jobs, but every single step along the way in corporate America has given me skills and connections and different things to
Mhm.
be able to finally produce and publish this podcast. And so I just wanted to paint that picture because in hindsight, it's easier to see some things when it comes to guidance than it is in the moment. And I'd love to really dive into guidance because I feel like I know for me and a lot of my clients that we just don't hear it, or how do we hear it? So my first question around guidance is, who do we ask? There in the course it talks about Jesus and the Holy Spirit and God, and we have angels. I mean, who are we asking for guidance, or does it matter?
Well, I think it's important to realize that when we receive guidance, it has come ultimately from God through the Holy Spirit, through Jesus. Angels are probably helping out in there. So there's a chain, and that chain, the whole chain's involved. So anywhere you ask on that chain, I think is really fine. Um, I personally asked Jesus, and I feel like the process goes better because I emotionally relate to asking Jesus. Somebody else might ask the Holy Spirit. There are places in the course where we're supposed to just straight up ask God.
Yeah.
I don't think it ultimately matters because we're really calling upon that chain that involves all of them.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's the issue. It's what kind of makes sense to you emotionally. I would just go with that.
Yeah. I love that clarity, because there are times where I feel, and I'm not thinking about it, where I'm just asking Jesus or I'm just asking the Holy Spirit. And then there are times where I'm like, God, and I just go straight to source.
Yeah,
Now,
whatever feels right, I would say.
yeah, I just did an interview that I think I published today, and the message in that too was whoever you resonate with, whoever feels closest to you is who you
Yeah.
ask. Now, this next question kind of goes along with manifestation and going back to that original topic. So, my understanding is that we don't ask for the things, the material things that we're wanting. We ask for what to do or what to say. What does the course say about what to ask as far as guidance is concerned? What are we asking?
Good question. And I think you're right. The course, and you see this especially in a supplement to the course called the Song of Prayer. It was dictated to Helen Schucman a couple of years after the course was published. Um, and it's really down on asking for things, for material things in the world, for the reasons that we talked about a little bit ago. What in the course we are told to ask for, and this is found all through the course. This is a huge topic in the Course in Miracles. The stress on asking for guidance is there in the text, in the workbook for students, in the manual for teachers. It was a huge emphasis in Helen and Bill's own private work with the author of the course. So it's huge, and it's always about decisions. It's not like asking for stuff. It's asking, what do I decide? What do I do here? What do I say? But I think we need to think in terms of asking for practically everything. And I'd like to, now that you brought this up, I'd like to read you a list of things, maybe not the whole list, but at least some of it, of things that Helen and Bill either were told they should have asked for or things they did ask for. And it's a really interesting list because it's kind of like everything.
Yeah.
So they asked whether Bill should get a flu shot, whether there are any corrections to make to Helen's notes, that she hears something incorrectly, how to handle minutia, like where to buy a winter coat, when they should transcribe the notes that Helen had taken down, when she should visit a dying friend in the hospital, which romantic partner to select, if Bill should invite someone to share a cab that Helen and Bill were going to share on the way home from work, if Bill should give the cab that comes for them away to someone else, whether Bill should photocopy the notes that Helen had taken down, what to do about an apparent need for a bookcase, how to handle inviting Bill to a group lunch that he was going to be reluctant to go to, if and when Helen should call Bill after a difficult day, when they've finally parted their ways and gone to their respective homes, when Helen should meditate again, after having a fear reaction to it, how they should get home from work on a certain day, apparently when the traffic was bad, who Helen should give miracles to on a particular day, what they should do about a young man, I think he was young, named Mike, who had developed feelings for Helen, what to do about a possible strike involving the elevator operators in Helen's building. You see, it's like anything and everything. It's little things, it's big things. If you look at the course, he mainly has in mind things having to do with our function. So it's like, how can I be helpful? Mm-hmm. In lesson 71, we ask, what would you have me do? Where would you have me go? What would you have me say, and to whom? Clearly, those questions contemplate, are being helpful to other people. That's the main focus of asking in the course. Mm-hmm. But it's not restricted to that. It's just ordinary stuff. In lesson 135, we ask if there are plans I should make today. Mm-hmm. In lesson 153, and this is supposed to be done for many lessons afterwards as well, we ask every hour, what would you have me do in the hour to come? Yeah. So it's kind of anything and everything. Is the trivia, it's the important stuff, which really involves other people. It's just our lives, all of our decisions.
Yeah. I want to go back to when you said decisions, but also the little things, like not just big decisions. I know for me and for my clients that the problem isn't mostly that we're not hearing, it's that we're not asking. We're not actually asking. Sometimes at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, I wished I'd asked for more guidance today because I'm building that muscle. And I think that the little things are the way to build that muscle, to practice listening, or to practice asking, and then to practice listening. So thank you so much for that, Liz. What stood out the most to me is that it wasn't specifically like just to who should I love today or what should I do. It was so personal to Helen and Bill. And I don't know if this is actually in the book or not, but what's coming up for me right now is that God, the Holy Spirit, Jesus, they know us. They know us. And so the guidance is for us, not to be afraid. And I think our problem is the resistance to letting go of control or fear. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, just a few things I wanted to say about all that. First of all, you talked about exercising the muscle, and that's absolutely what the course wants us to do. It envisions us going through the day asking just as often as we can. It's not always possible to sort of draw aside, close our eyes, although I do think we can sometimes ask open eyes, with eyes open in the moment and get something. I'm less successful in doing that than sitting down, closing my eyes and asking. But it envisions us going through the day, just asking and asking throughout the day, to the point where it wants us to make asking into just a habit. And habits are things that are so built up that we just do them kind of automatically. And so at one point, he talks about the habit until the habit of asking becomes involuntary. It's so ingrained that it's not even an effort, not even a decision to ask. It's just what we do. And obviously that's a high kind of bar to get over, but that's what he's envisioning. And he really sees asking as the key to having a happy day. So there's a lesson towards the end of the text called Rules for Decision, which basically is all about you have a happy day by making no decisions by yourself, by just asking. But the issue is we have, and I think what you said is really astute, we have a huge resistance to it. And so what I've seen among course students of very different stripes philosophically, like course teachers that wouldn't agree on much of anything, But almost as you know, a unanimous position in the course community, we have assumed that we really shouldn't do a lot of asking, right? We should just like set our intention and then trust that our impulses and such are guided. And the course's attitude is no, you have to ask and ask and ask and ask. And we don't like it. And the reason we don't like it is it represents a giving over of control. And my observation in life is whether we're open control freaks or closet control freaks, we're all control freaks. All of us really centrally prize being in control. And the notion of giving over control to someone else who has a different agenda than our ego has, who's got a different plan, who has a different value system than our ego does, it can be really scary. And so we all, I think, make up tons of excuses for not having to ask a lot. And we even try to spiritualize it. Like the most spiritual thing is not asking all the time. It's just knowing that you're like in the flow. And the reason is because we don't want to give over control. So in my experience and in different things that the course says, it's very clear that this issue of we want to retain control is the big obstacle in terms of exercising that muscle you were talking about.
Yeah. Now, when you say we don't want to give up control, I just had this image that is that like the ego thinks it knows what's best for us, and so the ego doesn't want to release that. Yeah, I'm curious about that.
Well, it is the ego, of course, but we are very, very intimately identified with the ego. We think that ego is us. And so when the ego says, I want to stay in control, and it also says, which you just mentioned, I think I know best. And both of those were talked about in some guidance that Jesus gave to Helen and Bill, where he said that Bill wants to stay in control. And Bill thinks he knows the one right option, the only real option in the situation. And so if guidance were to come in and say something different, Bill would think, well, that can't be right. You know, we weren't hearing correctly. But yeah, our ego wants control. It thinks it knows best. And we identify with the ego. And so we think giving up that control or questioning what we think we know is best is like a mortal threat. And so we just find excuses to not ask very much. We find excuses to just think, well, obviously that's the right option here. And that gets in the way.
And I love how the lessons are they're practical, they're practices. Like every day I'm meditating for 5 minutes every hour. And before that, sometimes it was 2 times 15 minutes or 20 minutes, but you have a mantra. And so I think that, you know, what's so beautiful about the text in the book is that the lessons are to practice. And it leads me to my next question. So once we start asking, or we get in the habit of asking, I know a lot of my clients say, I can't hear. and,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes I actually do hear, you know, like a start Tuesday or, you know, something like that, but they're very, very brief. They're not constant. It's not the normal way. But what are some ways that the guidance will appear for us aside from just hearing the message?
Yeah, the course does have a lot of practical instruction on how to ask and how to hear. There's a big bank of lessons starting in lesson 49 and going up through lesson 90 that has a lot of instruction in the asking process, how to wait for the answer, how to listen for the answer. Um, and then the course does talk about there are references to forms aside from inner hearing in which guidance can come, but it can come through dreams, it can come through other people, it can come through coincidences. But the huge overriding focus in the course is on quieting our minds and asking within and hearing something right then. Because that's the only form of guidance that you can just do wherever you are, in whatever situation you're in, all throughout the day. Okay, so that's the major focus, asking and listening within. Now, the course, as I said, does tell us how to do that. The main instruction, well, let me just go through what I can remember, because there is a lot of instruction about this. First of all, it wants us to ask more open-ended questions, because the more specific our questions get, the more they're probably not the right question. The course sees our questions as often coming from a mindset that is the problem. And so that mindset is going to produce questions that are not the right questions. So we have to ask somewhat open-ended questions. We have to really open our minds, and not just think, I know the answer, and not mentally fill in the answer. There's one place, and it's in Personal Guidance to Helen and Bill, it's not in the course proper. There's one place where he said, referring to the Holy Spirit, prejudge his answer not. Like, don't assume you know. Open your mind wide open. Okay. And then he wants you to really quiet your mind and listen attentively. So listen like you're waiting to hear a pin drop. Your mind is fully focused on the listening. While you're listening, he wants you to be patient, because the answer may not come right away. You might need to repeat the question. And you'll also need to keep your mind free of wandering thoughts. So while you're listening attentively, your mind's going to wander.
Yeah.
Right. And so he wants you to pull it back, pull it back, pull it back. And then he also wants you to have an attitude of listening with confidence, knowing that this answer belongs to you. Like, we tend to listen like, I'm not going to hear anything. I'm not going to hear anything. And
Yeah.
he wants us to listen with real confidence. And beyond the confidence, to be determined to hear, and he even have an attitude of refuse not to hear. I refuse not to hear. And if we have all of that going on, our likelihood of hearing is much, much greater. And it doesn't mean we're going to hear every time. I strike out all the time, but I also get something all the time. Yeah. It's not infrequent. So if you're asking all through the day, let's say you strike out like 60% of the time, which you may, you're still going to hear 40% of the time. And that 40%, in my experience, it makes things go different. You decide to do different things with your day. You don't just stay in the same ruts. You hear unexpected things. You hear really constructive things. I will often hear to do something I've been avoiding or procrastinating on, or to attend to someone's needs that I've been like, keeping at arm's length. It makes your day go better. So what if you don't hear every single time? Keep asking. And the other thing I would say is, if you listen really attentively, you will be able to hear at levels of subtlety. Like, the answer may be really, really kind of subtle and faint. But if you tune in, you'll be able to hear it. Whereas if you listen with no confidence, with no hope, and no patience, you won't hear it.
Yeah. So I have a little story that I want to share about that, but what just popped in was really strong. And so I want to get your take on this. I have heard in some course communities and outside of course communities that mentioned it can be very, very faint. So what I've heard is that the ego speaks first and the ego is the loudest. What would you have to say about that?
That is a passage in the course that has nothing to do with guidance. Okay.
I love that.
It's repeated twice. And what it means in context is, as you look at your world, the ego has already interpreted everything you see. That's how it speaks first. And the specific context where that's being talked about is when you read the Bible, you read various passages, and the ego just rushes in to interpret what it thinks they mean. Okay. And then the Holy Spirit comes in to sort of overturn its interpretations. That's not talking about when you ask for guidance. That's talking about life. Like the ego's always rushing in to tell you what everything means. And the Holy Spirit then has to overturn its judgments. When you ask for guidance, my experience is that anything can happen. So the very first and loudest thing you hear may be the Holy Spirit. On the other hand, your ego may step in and say, yeah, this is it. There's no rules when we ask for guidance. However, I do think that there are ways to spot the Holy Spirit's guidance and kind of distinguish it somewhat reliably from your ego's thoughts. So that's an important topic in itself. The Holy Spirit's guidance tends to be kind of out of the blue, tends to be a fresh perspective. Oftentimes you thought you knew all the options, like there was a list of 4 options, and real guidance oftentimes is like not on the list. I mean, that's not always the case, but it's often the case. It often has a right feeling to it. It feels like, yeah, I can just tell. That's challenging. I don't like that, but I can tell that's right. I know that's real guidance. So there are ways that you can distinguish real guidance from your ego's thoughts. Because in my experience, and I think pretty much everyone's experience, when you ask, either one can come in. You just never know.
Yeah, I loved how you said that there's different ways that you can tell it is the Holy Spirit. And I love the fresh perspective, or just something. For me, it kind of is like, I never thought of that before.
Exactly.
And that
Exactly.
brings me to the story, because our thoughts can be guidance as well. Would you agree? Yeah.
Of course, I do think, just before you launch in, I do think the Holy Spirit is reaching us however he can. And a lot of our normal impulses and promptings are guided. Most aren't, of course, but a lot of them are. And we didn't realize we just had something, an impulse from the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Yeah. So this morning I was doing today's lesson. This is the story. And today's lesson is I will be still and listen to the truth. And there's a question that you ask after. And when I sat down, I read the lesson, I started to do the 5 minutes with I will be still and listen to the truth. And I became aware of a thought that was, oh, another listening exercise, or, some sort of complaint. And then about 2 to 3 minutes in, I started noticing a lesson from a while back. And I had this repeating thought that God speaks to me all throughout the day. God speaks to me all throughout the day. And I was like, oh, there it is. So I love how you said that, if you get still, if you listen, like you're listening for a pin drop, or you're listening really intently and paying attention, it's there. The guidance is there. It's just whether or not we're listening or in tune with it.
Yeah. And I've had so many. One of the great ways I think guidance can come is you can be in a really one of those deep, open, engaged, exploratory conversations with someone. And out of that conversation, an idea just pops into your mind. And it wasn't like you asked and you channeled it, but this idea pops into your mind. And in my experience, more formal means of guidance will often confirm that idea, which means that idea was guided. It just didn't come out of a guidance seeking process.
Well, I love this whole conversation. I know that years ago, when I started to dabble into spirituality, well, a long time ago, but there was like an effort. I have to do this. I have to manifest. I have to how am I going to know? How am I going to know? And what I love about today's conversation is that it puts just a more gentle or soft, or I don't really know the word that I'm looking for, but it's just a different way that as long as I'm listening to my guidance and I accept my function and I fulfill my function, I don't have to worry about anything. And that just feels so warm and comforting compared to
Mm.
I've got to handle it all myself. So uh,
Absolutely. That's one of the great benefits of guidance, because life is too much for us to handle on our own. We can't figure everything out.
yeah,
We don't know what's coming down the pike. We don't know all the facts that are relevant to a decision. It's just too much for these little brains. And the part of the beauty of guidance is we can consult an all-knowing source who does know everything. And yeah, our hearing is imperfect and all that, but still, my experience, I mean, I'm not a great hearer of guidance. I don't feel gifted. I ask a lot, but I don't feel gifted in the hearing process. And yet, I get things I would never thought of. I would never have thought of on my own. And the beauty of it is we can lean on a larger presence that is adequate to a task that we're not adequate to.
yeah, and that has our best interest.
That has our best interests in mind. I like what you said earlier about it's for us.
Yeah.
It's not asking something of us. It's for us.
Mhm. Yeah. I know when I got sober, step 3 is we made a decision to turn our lives and our will over to the care of God as we
Mm-hmm.
understood him. And that was really pivotal for me because in my background, the way I grew up, I was afraid and I thought I was going to be punished for everything I did wrong. And I truly believed that everything I did was wrong. So with that set of beliefs, it's hard to trust guidance
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because to trust someone that you think is going to punish you for doing it wrong, that's just not, going to work. And so I love how the 12 steps, the course, all of it rewired how I saw God. And that is what gives me the trust. And I am still making it a working part of my mind. Like I ask a lot.
Sure.
Some days I forget.
Sure.
Some days I'm just all ego and I forget, but I
Mm-hmm.
do ask a lot. And, I think that the trust in the care that it's for us and it's in our best interest. So I know we've been talking for a while. I have a few questions I want to ask you. Is there anything else that you want to add around this juicy topic of guidance and manifesting?
I'll just say something about what you were just talking about. I do think that trust is a very hard one thing. Just think about trusting another person. It takes years to really establish deep trust in another person, and often we never get there.
Mhm.
And so establishing trust in a presence we can't see, that we may think of as authoritarian, uh, is also a hard one. And the course does acknowledge that we gain that trust through the asking and through seeing the results. But along the way, I think it's also helpful to have what you were talking about, which is belief in a caring God. Being taught a belief in an authoritarian God, I think is very damaging. And to believe that God is actually caring changes the whole ball game. The course teaches about a caring God. I think Jesus 2000 years ago taught about a caring God. And I think that is a more helpful teaching than, like, we're often taught these days, like we're God and we're all just, there's only just this one impersonal presence. And something that's impersonal doesn't care. And so, I believe based on the course that yes, we're one with God, we are part of God, but God is still the creator and he cares. And that idea of caring makes all the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I think we could do an entire episode on trust.
Sure, it's a huge
So maybe
topic. We're
I'll have
very
to,
untrusting
yeah,
creatures. Yeah.
right. I was like, I could just open a whole nother can of worms, but we're wrapping up now, so we'll save it. I have some questions that I asked all of my
Sure.
guests. I think that we've talked about this. I think you just said a lot of this answer in what you just said. How would you define God or source?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question because I believe that the spiritual, realm, this sort of spiritual subculture in our society, as well as the society in general, is in a state of God avoidance. And so I just think we're like not wanting the old-fashioned God, but we're also not wanting, I mean, there's something that Emily and I, my wife and I teach a lot, which was what we call the cult of self. And we believe that there is a value system that has taken over the culture, taken over the spiritual subculture, where it's all about us, our magnificence, our power, getting what we want, manifesting our desires. And in that value system, we not only don't want the old authoritarian God, we don't want any kind of God really, because that any kind of God could get in the way of making it all about us. And so I think it's very popular these days to see God in very impersonal terms, as just some kind of energy or some kind of void or some kind of suchness. And I think that, there can be value in seeing God that way. I think it also makes God safe from the standpoint of our ego. I personally believe, based on the Course, and also based on things like near-death experiences, I believe there is God that is a conscious agent, that God is personal, not in the sense of having boundaries or having a body, but personal in the sense of being a conscious agent, having his own thoughts, having his own will, having his own feelings, having his own goals and plan. And that God, yes, we are one with him. Yes, we are part of him, but he is still the creator. He is still the greater one. He fully includes us in himself. There's no boundary between us and him, but he is still the creator. So I do see God in that sense of being personal. I'm a theist. I believe in a theistic God, but I believe in a God who is pure love. So if you could, the Course says, echoing the New Testament, that God is only love. And if you could imagine the idea of love without anything else mixed in, so imagine pure love, and then imagine that pure love becoming a being, and then becoming limitless and all powerful, and then becoming the creator of everything else. I think that's a decent way of trying to wrap our minds around God, who ultimately cannot be comprehended with these brains. I think he's so far beyond our current comprehension. But I think we can use little kind of mental models to get in the ballpark. And that's one that I use.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I notice I have fun when I ask all my guests that question because there's just so many different perspectives, and yet I feel a common thread. The next question I have for you is, what would you say is the purpose of life?
Well, I personally believe that our purpose for being here is to ultimately return to God. The Course teaches that we've separated or we wouldn't be here, and that we are here to go through a developmental process in which we change on the inside. We see the world differently. We are different in relation to others, uh, and that we ultimately get closer and closer to that reawakening to God. I think that's a developmental process. I think it largely takes place in our relationships. I think it's a process of going from being more egocentric and more angry to being more other-centered and loving. And the Course teaches that the way we get from that one place to the other is through learning how to forgive, which we find, I think, quite difficult. Our egos want to hang on to the past and hang on to what was done to us. So I think it's basically a process of learning how to love, but we get there through forgiveness.
Thank you. That was beautiful. The last question I have for you is, if you could take one piece of wisdom that you have now and offer it to a younger version of yourself, what would that piece of wisdom be?
I should be ready for this because Emily told me that you asked this of her, but I haven't thought about it. One piece of wisdom to offer to my younger self. I could think of 100. My younger self was so naive, and I'm sure I still am. But I think if I had to narrow it down to one piece, it'd probably be to pay much closer attention to what the Course is saying and to really do what it's saying. And I pick that because that encompasses so many things that I would say. So if I had one, I think I'm going to pick one that scoops up a whole bunch of other ones.
Right. I like it. Do what the Course says.
Yeah. And pay attention to what it says. I've been a Course teacher now for going on 40 years. I've been with the Course for 42 years. And it's been a long process of learning progressively how to really pay attention to what it's saying rather than view it through the lens of what I assume it must be saying.
I agree. Now, how do people keep up with you, get in touch with you?
Well, we have a website, which is for the Circle of Atonement. It's circleofa.org. Emily and I do a podcast called Exploring A Course in Miracles. That seems to be the main place where people encounter us. We publish our edition of A Course in Miracles, which is purple, called the Complete and Annotated Edition. And we also offer a free online community, which I think is community.circleofa.org. And we offer a number of free events there, and also offer a paid membership for more benefits.
I will be sure to include all of those links. And I just want to say that the podcast that you and Emily do is amazing. The depth that you go into the Course, it's been so helpful for me in my journey as well. So
thank you very much. And didn't I see that somebody with a name similar to yours joined our online community?
Yes, I did.
I'm outing you.
Yes, I just joined yesterday. I'm teaching the Course on Tuesday nights here. And so, however I can bring in more of this community, I'm open to it. So,
well, welcome. It's great to have you there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your wisdom and your heart with the world. I truly, truly appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I would like to personally thank you for tuning in to this episode. If you haven't already, please be sure to like this episode, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so that you never miss a beat. And if you really resonated with this content, please share it with all of your friends so that collectively we can expand our consciousness. Have a very blessed week.